Season's greetings, and welcome to this episode of Let's Create Something with Trapcode TAO. What we'll create together today, whether or not the mood of this whole thing is appropriate for the time of the year it is when you're watching this, is a jolly low-poly winter night loop scene. Of course, as the name and the title says, we're not aiming for any kind of hyper-photorealistic render here, but rather simply to be able to pull out a nice pre-rendered loop of video content that has a bit of this feel-good magical wintertime ambience. Anyways, if the year 2018 has proven us anything at all, is that photorealistic graphics are not the only kind of graphics that can produce enticement. Thank you, Fortnite. And before we get those quantum computers, photorealism sometimes takes a needless crazy amount of time to render, especially if you're still working with native renderers in traditional 3D programs. The main big win for us in this Christmas episode is at the end, when we'll hit the render button, it'll be done before we even have the time to piss our name in the snow. Even at 4K resolution, and we don't need to thoroughly study any of the multiple third-party 3D renderers that are inundating the market right now and have become, it seems to me, the new standard workflow for any serious traditional 3D application users. But let's not get distracted by the intricate nature of our evolving industry for the moment. What I'd like this episode to be, mostly, is a great occasion for us to share some comfort time together as we learn some fun stuff with Trapcode TAO. Stuff that's certainly not gonna make you win a Nobel Prize in computer graphics, but stuff that might not necessarily be intuitive to pull off if, for example, you would be someone that's just starting off with Trapcode TAO. So hit pause for a moment if necessary, go get yourself a warm cup of cinnamon-flavored hot chocolate and some tiny happy person-shaped ginger biscuits, turn your Christmas lights on, sit back, and let us fully indulge together in that soft and cozy, timeless holidays winter spirit. And that, even if you happen to be watching this straight in the middle of July. So let's hop After Effects, and the first thing we're gonna do is create a new composition by hitting Ctrl N. And we're gonna make this a standard HD TV 180p resolution, but we're gonna use 30 frames per second. And let's hit OK. Let's create a new solid by hitting Ctrl Y, and let's make sure it is at the same size as our composition, and we're gonna call this TAO. Let's hit OK. Right in the Effects and Preset panel, we're gonna fetch our TAO effect right here and apply it on our solid. Okay, so one thing that we are not going to use during this episode is the automatically generated path, so let's turn it off. What we're going to use to build our trees is a TAO light object. So we're going to create an After Effects light object, and TAO is going to use it to create our geometry. So let's hit Ctrl Alt Shift L to create a new light, and let's choose a spotlight. Let's make sure that it's called TAO, all in caps, very important. And let's make sure that our radius is set to 100. Let's hit OK. We are going to make a small hierarchy here, so let's create ourselves a null by hitting Ctrl Alt Shift Y. And let's make this null 3D. If you don't see these options, just hit F4 on the keyboard, and let's make this null 3D. We are going to pick whip our light to this null, and we're going to make also another null. So let's once again hit Ctrl Alt Shift Y and make also this null 3D, and we're going to pick whip our first null to this second null. So this one is the one we're going to keyframe, so let's call it Sculpting TAO. And this one is going to be the one we're going to use if we want to later move things around. So let's call this one Main. Now we're going to zero out our light, because by default it is set to some random position. So let's set all of these position parameters to 0. So just hit P to reveal the position property on the light. And now that we have centered our light, we can begin to sculpt our tree. So right there, my light is of a dark color. So let's fix that first thing. So let's hit Control Shift Y on the light, and let's make sure that our light color is a pure white here. So let's do that, hit OK. And let's build our first tree. So we are going to keyframe our null object here, which our light is attached to. So let's hit P to reveal the position, and let's create a keyframe on the frame 0. Now let's go to frame 300 at 10 seconds in the timeline, and let's bring it upwards like that. Something around 370. So this is going to be how tall our tree is going to be. Next thing we are going to do is let's get in the TAO options, and let's go into the paths from TAO lights section here, and we're going to make sure that size from radius is checked, because that's going to allow us to use the size property from our light to decide how thick our path is going to be over the course of its length. So let's do that. Let's open up the options of our light by quickly twice tapping on A here. Let's go back to frame 0, and let's create a keyframe on the radius. Now let's right click on this keyframe here, and then we're gonna toggle hold keyframe. Let's get a little bit further in time. So right about here, or maybe a little bit sooner, for something around frame 90. So this is gonna be where our foliage starts, or since it's pine tree, I'd rather call it something else. But let's create another keyframe here, and let's hit page up to go right up to the next frame, 91, and we're gonna create another frame there. So let's go back and let's set both these two by selecting the first one here, and let's hit Shift and select the first one there. Both of those are selected now, and we're gonna reduce that. So this is going to be our trunk there, and we're just laying out a basic shape here. We're gonna add a little bit more details further on, so we can start by adding a couple of segments. So let's get in the segments here, and let's increase that so we have a little bit more detail to work with in our geometry. And now we're gonna create some kind of a scaling down layer of triangles in our geometry here to create the shape of our tree. So let's do that here. Right here we have this radius that is set to 100, and this corresponds to the width of our object here. Let's go a little bit further there, and let's reduce that. And let's also right click on this and make sure that it's not a held keyframe. Same for this one. So right here it starts at 100 and it goes down to, let's make it to 80. So right, as you can see there, we have a little diagonal shape starting to appear, and we're gonna make our second layer. So let's go just one frame further, and let's go back to 90 pixels. So we're getting a second step here, and once again you can put the numbers you like here, but let's follow some logic in this kind of procedure. So let's go a little bit further in time there, and let's set this value down to 70. Right there we have a second step, and let's get one frame further and set this to 80, and let's keep on doing that. We seem to be starting to form some kind of a tree shape here, so let's go a little bit further. Once again, set this down to, this time it's 60, right there. Let's get one frame further, set this to 70, and let's get to frame 300 and set that to 0 in order to have our pointy shape. So maybe it's not ideal here, but we have as much control as we want with those keyframes there. So let's make it a little bit more obvious for these steps here. So instead of going down 80 here, let's select all those keyframes here all together by holding Shift there. And while we're at this one here in the timeline with all those selected. Let's reduce that. And perhaps we can also select all of this here and hold Alt to proportionally scale this down like such. And maybe we can add one more step to that. So let's get it a little bit further there. Right where it's around 40. Create a keyframe. Another one there. And let's reduce that a little bit more. So right there. Play around like that. So here we have some kind of a low poly tree shape with the default, most of the default settings in our TAO effect. So let's change that a little bit. We can increase the amount of sides here, so we're gonna get something that's a little bit more rounded. And if you can see right here, let me set that to full resolution. We have what is called a chamfer. So let's turn this off here, and let's increase a little bit more the sides, so we get something like that. And let's color it now. So we can hit U to reveal our keyframes here. And this is where we have our trunk here, this part there. So if we, once again, quickly twice tap on A, and we have the color here. So let's create a keyframe right here where we have the trunk there. And let's do like this. And this one is gonna be green. So let's pick up some kind of a green color there. And let's make both of those brown color for our trunk. So something like that. And since I can notice some brownish color here down in the, depending if you want, where you want your separation here, let's move around those keyframes by holding Alt and hitting the left and right arrows on the keyboard there. And we can also perhaps make this one a held keyframe. Now we have a tree. It's pretty fine. Now let's create a nice floor of snow where this tree can exist. So in order to make our snow floor, we're gonna create a new light object. So let's once again hit Control Alt Shift L and make sure that it is a spotlight. And we're also gonna call this one TAO in all caps. Let's hit OK. Now we've got this new circle here that just appeared in front of us. Let's make also a little null hierarchy here. So let's create a new one, Control Alt Shift Y, and let's make another one, Control Alt Shift Y again. And let's make both of those 3D. Let's attach our light to the first null, and let's attach the null to the second null. So we can here center this one out. So let's set that 0, 0, and 0. Now we're gonna stretch this one. So let's open up the position properties for the second null here. And let's create a keyframe on the first frame. Let's go to frame 300. And let's push it back on the Z. So we won't see any difference here because we're pushing it towards the horizon. So let's type a value, something like 4000, and let's get to the first keyframe and let's type minus 4000 on the Z. So now we're inside this kind of a tube here. That's not exactly what we want. Let's have only 4 sides on this one. So since we have in our TAO effect, we have 124 segments and 40 sides here. So we're gonna have to hard code that into our light object. In order to do that, let's just add something into the name of the layer here. So let's type SID 4, and that's gonna make it square. Now we're gonna change the proportions of this. So we could use the settings here from the segments here to change the proportions the scaling proportions of this shape, but it's gonna also influence our tree. So we're gonna change the proportions using the scale properties from this null that we've got over here. So it might sound a little counterintuitive to do that, but let's unlock these values here by clicking on the link chain icon. And let's increase the value, not on the X, but on the Y. And also let's pick up our null here from the top and let's just move it down. So we're kind of having a floor here, and we can also stretch it. Let's reduce the value on the X, so something around 5 like that. And we've got this whole floor. Now let's create a camera so we can have another angle over what we're creating. So let's hit Ctrl-Alt-Shift-C. And there we've got our camera panel. Let's make sure that it is 50mm, the default settings in After Effects. Click OK. Let's make ourselves a little null here. Ctrl-Alt-Shift-Y. Make it 3D, and we're gonna parent the camera to it. It's gonna be some kind of a little dolly. So let's make a 45-degree angle here on the Y, and let's hit C to cycle between our camera tools, and let's just rotate this like such. Then we can get back to our null for our floor, and let's bring it upwards until we intersect with the tree trunk there. All right. So now we're gonna add a little bit of topographic details on this. So we're gonna create some small hills, and we're gonna use the fractal from our TAO effect here to do that. So first thing we have to understand is we don't want a fractal displacement to affect our trees. We want them to stick around in this exact shape. So first let's color code this. So this is our tree here. Let's make it green. Let's open up the options for the slide here by quickly twice tapping on A, and right here on the fall off distance, let's set this to 0. That means it won't be affected by the fractal displacements once we activate it in the TAO effect. Let's get back to our TAO effect, right into the fractal displacement. And perhaps one thing we can do before that is just quickly head into the shader here and activate our second pass here to look at how our geometry is going there. So perhaps we can increase the amount of sides here. In fact, we do want to have more than 4 sides. So let's remove that from the title here, and there we've got a little bit more of an impression of how our tiling is happening here on our floor plane. Let's increase the amount of sides here. So one thing that we can do is cut down the amount of sides on our tree now, since there's a lot of geometry detail in this tree now, more than we need. So we can optimize this by hard coding the amount of sides on the light that create the tree geometry. So let's hit SID 24 maybe. So that's gonna give us, so that'll give us this amount of geometry without affecting our floor plane. And let's turn on the fractal displacement. So let's get over here and let's increase that. So right now our tree is also getting deformed, even though we set, as I said, the fall off distance to 0. One more thing that we have to do also is to tell TAO that we want to use the fractal amplitude from the fall off distance. So that's what we're gonna check here, and our tree is gonna get back to its normal shape. So right there we have a nice low poly floor with a tree. Let's make some friends for our tree. So we're gonna duplicate this little hierarchy here. We're gonna make ourselves a second tree. So let's select all 3 layers here, and let's hit Ctrl-D to duplicate. And let's bring this on the top here, and since it's increments by default, our number of sides, the amount of sides here has become 25, so we can just set this back to 24. And one thing I'd like to do is just put some random character here at the end, so when I duplicate it, it doesn't increment the last number here. And let's pick up our main null, and we can offset the tree like that. Not upwards, but maybe on the side like this, and maybe a little bit on the Z as well. So we're gonna make just a little area with some trees here going on. We can also rotate them. So let's open up the rotation properties from the main null here, and let's rotate it maybe on the Z so they're not completely straight up. And maybe we can do the same with the other one. So let's give it a -5 rotation on the Z like this. This is gonna make it seem a little bit less regular here. So let's make a third tree. Let's pick up all 3 layers here and once again duplicate by hitting Control D. And see there, we have this increment here, but it didn't affect the amount of sides. So that's what I was aiming for. Let's pick up this main and let's also offset it like such and perhaps move it a little bit downwards. And if you want to make more variations, of course, you can go inside each of those and change the proportions, make the trunk smaller, maybe like such. And let's make like 5 of them. So let's once again duplicate this. Let's bring it a little bit on the side, like that. And let's also rotate from on another angle. And our 5th tree there. So let's once again duplicate this little stack there and push it good, push it real good. All right, so now we can perhaps make another patch of tree and distance it so we can after that repeat all this and make some kind of a corridor. So we're gonna make a new null and we're gonna link all those mains to it. So let's go up there and create a new null, Control Alt Shift Y, and this one master tree 1, and let's only grab the main nulls here, hitting Control to add to the selection and parent that to this one. Make sure that it is 3D, and then we can duplicate all this stack here. Let's duplicate this, bring it up, and let's pick up our master tree number 2, and we can offset those on the X there. And let's get back to a normal angle here with our camera. And maybe let's pick up our master tree 1 and our master tree 2 and maybe offset them like such. So we have 2 patches of tree and we're gonna repeat them so we have some kind of a corridor going in the distance here. And let's shut down our wireframe for the moment. And there we have our little environment. Maybe we can alter a little bit the position for those trees here, so they're not exactly the same repetition as on the other side. Maybe they got a little bit of variance on their position here. So let's take a little bit of our time to do that. Not too much. Just to say that it's not exactly the same as the other one. And let's not spend too much time on that since it's only an exercise, but you get the idea. You have a lot of control on how you want those to appear. Now we have our patches of trees. Let's make little adjustments on our camera angle here so we can kind of have some view on the distance. And let's repeat those. So one thing that we want to have repeated is our tree, but maybe we don't want the floor to repeat the whole floor. So we're gonna pull off the floor from the repetition by hard coding something into the light object. So let's pick up our light here for the floor. This is our floor. Let's hit enter and let's type rep : 0. that will just prevent it from being repeated when we activate the repetitions from the TAO effect. So let's get onto those repetitions here. Repeat paths. And let's open up the first repeater, and let's start by adding one repetition here. It's repeating it on the sides. So let's put that to 0, and we're gonna repeat it on the Z. So maybe, I don't know, 1000 pixels. And there we can add more. And we're gonna have this little corridor of trees. We can walk in the middle. Now this is very low poly, so we're gonna smooth everything down. So let's get down to the shader, and instead of flat, let's try smooth. So our floor seems to be a little bit out of place there. It seems we're gonna have to do something to fix that around. So let's open up our settings for the light, and let's see. So we seem to be having some kind of an issue here with how the shading appears on the floor there. So maybe we ought not to stretch it that much on the Y. So let's bring this down to try to see if that can prevent it. And we might have to get this floor a little bit down like such. And there we have something that's a little less troublesome in terms of how the shading appears on this shape. Let's move around our camera a little bit. All right, maybe we can create a background. So let's create a new solid. Control Y. Let's call this BG. Let's put it underneath everything, and let's add a simple ramp on it. Simple gradient ramp. And let's solo that. We're gonna make this night time, so let's add a simple tritone effect on here so we can map some 3 new colors over this grayscale gradient. So let's put for the highlight some kind of a blue, and for the midtones some kind of a darker blue. And this one we can put a very, very dark blue color like such. And maybe this, something like that. Now we don't see it that much. Maybe we can change this a little bit. And let's pick up our gradient here. Control Shift H to reveal the layer controls. V to pick up the arrow here. And let's move this in order to get exactly what we want there. And let's create our own lighting. So let's go down to the material and lighting section, and let's check include TAO Lumi lights. Now we're gonna create ourselves a TAO Lumi light. So let's hit Control Alt Shift L, and this one we're gonna make it a point light, and let's call this one TAO Lumi, all in caps. Hit OK. Now the lighting is going to change drastically because this will just remove the default lighting that we have and add this without any ambient lighting. So let's add an ambient light. Control Alt Shift L. We're going to select the ambient, and for the color of this ambient, let's pick up the blue from here. Right there. So for our Lumi light, let's push it in the distance. First, zero it out. So I'm going to quickly create a null here. Just attach this light to it and zero it down. Now, hitting P right there, I'm going to push it in the distance. Like that. And maybe we can tweak a little bit the intensity. So we're gonna get this cool backlight here, and let's make our floor a little bit nicer than that. So are we in the smooth setting? Yes. So right in the segments we can uncheck the break sides, which will make everything a little bit smoother. Let's add a little bit of texture detail on this layer of snow. So right here I've got this normal, this snow texture with the normals, and I'm gonna put the link to that in the description down below. So let's import that project here, and let's bring both of these down in our timeline underneath everything, and let's just shut them off. And right in the TAO effect, we are going to open up the texture section here, and we're gonna assign this, and we're gonna, for the normal map, we're gonna set this snow N, and right away we can see we have some changes here. It's also affecting our tree. So how we want this to be only applied on the floor. So what we'll need to do, and we should have done that on our first tree before we copied them all. So we need to prevent the texture from being applied on those. So we're gonna just add something to the light title here, and it's TEX: 0. So that's gonna tell all those lights that we don't want any texture being applied on whatever geometry is being emitted by those lights. So let's simply paste this onto every light that represent our little trees here until the texture disappears from all of them, and it's only on the floor now. Next, let's change the scale of this. So right in the texture scale here, maybe we can try to put different numbers here so we have a little bit more smaller icy frost texture here. And also its strength here, it's maybe too strong. Maybe we can reduce that down to something like 33, and right away we can see we already got a little bit more detail here. And it's not the end of the world, I mean, but it's gonna render very fast. Let's make sure that the horizon here blends with the background. So right in the visibility section here for the fog color, let's pick up the color that is just close to our horizon here, and let's reduce the fog start value here, and let's also reduce fog end. So right there we're getting towards something that's a little nicer in terms of blending of our horizon. Oh yeah, we can control the distance for our TAO Lumi lights. So this is maybe something we can work with a little bit here in the material and lighting section here. We've got this light fall off, so let's set this to smooth, and as you can see here, we've got our light is away in the back here. So let's see, it's around 3000 pixels in the back. So let's make the fall off distance something close to 3000, and as you can see, we've crawled up this light here closer to us. So maybe we can bring this even closer to us, and let's increase let's decrease the ambient, and let's increase the diffusion. We can also increase the specular to get more of this reflection details here, and mess around with the shininess depending on how reflective you want the specular to be. So that's pretty nice. I like this mood here, a little winter night ambience. So I think we can just make this loop and call it a day. So in order to make this loop, we would simply have to repeat it in the repetition, but since we've shut off the repetition from our floor, we're gonna do something even simpler than that. So we've got everything worked out in our TAO effect here. So let's duplicate this whole TAO layer here. So we've got another one down there. The only thing we're gonna change on our second copy here, and let me see, we're gonna select the layer on top here, and let's lock it down here, and we're gonna connect some properties in the world transform. So let's get to our TAO properties here from the layer that's underneath, and let's get to world transform, and we're gonna link the Z position here. So let's alt click on the stopwatch here for the W position, and then we're gonna write down the little code here. We're gonna open bracket and then use the pick whip, get to the X value here, then we're gonna type a comma, then we're gonna pick whip the Y value here from this, and then another comma, and we're gonna pick up the Z value, but we're gonna add minus 4,000, and let's start with that, and we're gonna see where that leads us. And I think we have to close down the bracket here. So we've got a second copy here. Let's see how far it is. So normally we're repeating in our first repeater, it's 1000 pixels 3 times, so we should have, in theory, and what I meant to do, sorry for the mishap here, so instead of minus 4,000 here, let's make a plus. Let's make it a plus. So all of this is going to be pushed back in the distance, and let's bring up our the other layer there. So we're gonna simply move the Z position from this, and the other one is gonna follow along. So let's create a keyframe on frame 0 for the world transform position. Let's go to frame 90, so a 3-second loop, and let's type down minus 4,000 here. So let's make a marker here, so shift 3 on frame 90, let's hit home to get on frame 0, shift 1. So if we compare, we've got a little mishap here, so maybe I miscalculated. Let's try another value. So here, instead of 4,000, we've got to go a little bit further. Let's try 6,000. That means we also have to move here 6,000 pixels, and let's compare 1, 3. So it's about exactly the same, except that we've got this other one in the distance that we can see here, and of course we would have to get a third one here. What we can simply do here is duplicate this, and then we have a third one, and then let's hit twice on U, and instead of 6,000, let's multiply this by 2. It's gonna be 12,000, and if we compare now, they are both exactly the same. And if I get back to frame 89 and give this a quick pre-render, you are nicely moving along through our pine tree corridor. So now that we've got this right, maybe we ought to change the visibility setting. One thing that we can do if we want to mess around with the visibility, we always want these values to be the same on all 3. So let's lock down the one that's on top and simply get the visibility connected here by alt clicking on the fog start and simply connecting it there. Alt click on the fog end like such, and then we can simply copy and paste, hit Control C on both of these, and we're gonna paste that down under the other one. So that means now we can play around with this from the first layer, and it's gonna apply it on the other one. So maybe here I've got a different background color. Oh, also we might want to connect this color too. So yeah, let's get down here. Fog color. We can just link it to this. Touch right there, and paste this onto the third one. Let's verify. So depending on if that maybe was the color you wanted to blend or have something like that. Here our light are revealing the green colors of the tree in the distance. So that's pretty cool. And we're close to the end now. Everything now that we've duplicated this, like everything we would change, would absolutely need to link properties from the other layers in order to keep it all the same. So now perhaps we want more segments on this to smooth everything down, like not the trees, but most importantly the floor. So I've just increased wildly the amount of segments here. It's taken a little bit to render there, and it's not that much different. We might want to add the amount of size, and so that these values must always be the same on the other one. So let's connect those. Let's make sure the segments and the size are kept the same on all three. Copy there. We might want to set this to super sample, depending on what kind of quality render you're aiming for. This seems to be smoothing it down a little bit. So once again, as everything, we should link it with the first one. So super sample. Also new to TAO now, we do have some control over the depth of field. So right now it's set to off in the camera. We can turn this on, and the focus distance might be off a little bit. So let's bring this down to quarter res just while we do this, and maybe a wise thing to do also would be just for a moment to reduce the amount of segments there. Let's put 360, let's put 80 right there. So we've got some depth of field here. If we want to spot where it is aimed, we can simply overcharge it temporarily just to see where it's aiming. So right there, I'm gonna push the focus distance. Everything seems to be out of focus right now. So now we're up in the front. If I push this back a little, now it's getting closer to the middle. So the back is blurred, the front is blurred, and right there somewhere in the middle it's gonna be crisp. And the iris shape, I'm gonna set that to hexagon. Gonna take it a little bit longer to process, but nevertheless. And now we can reduce the aperture back to something that's less crazy. And we're almost done here. Let's quickly make some shining stars there, and we're gonna really make it easy on this one. Usually we use particle systems to create the starry sky, but let me show you a quick way using fractals that's gonna give us a little bit less control than if it was particles, of course, but it can really save time to do this. So I'm gonna simply create a new layer right there on top of our BG layer, and simply add fractal, a simple fractal effect here, and then let's solo this down. So we're gonna increase the contrast a lot and decrease the brightness, and we just want to have some tiny little speck here. So we're also gonna reduce the scale down to something around 4. And let's try to make something out of this. And right there we have some kind of a star distribution here. It's not detailed at all, but it's gonna be another way for us to make some stars very quickly. And we can animate them like simply to have shining stars instead of static ones. We're gonna check the cycle evolution and simply make one revolution on the evolution over the course of our 90 frames. So that means our stars are gonna brittle. Now let's turn everything back on. Let's pre-comp this. I know pre-comping can sometimes feel impolite for solid layers, but let's hit Control Shift C and let's move all attributes here in the composition. So now we have a composition that's only our stars here, and we're also gonna pre-comp this once again, just this solid, move all attributes. Now we've got our fractal enclosed in there. Let me just close this down, and let's duplicate this and let's set this to Luma Matte. That means that we'll have the transparency, and then we can come back here and we'll have our starry sky layered correctly. And we can maybe turn the intensity down, bring this back to full, and maybe it's a little bit like put a little bit more time on your sky. I'm just going quickly, but there we have our little winter scene created all in After Effects using only Trapcode TAO. So try it out. Might be something that leads you to create all other kinds of stuff. If you know how it works, many ideas might come around. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.